I loved Star Wars, Indiana Jones. I wanted to be Han Solo.
Sarah J. Maas has been in love with fantasy since she was 12 years old. 3 decades later, the fantasy author is a force within the publishing industry. She's written 15 books, sold more than 38 million copies, and is a #1 New York Times best-selling author.
Do you remember the moment you first fell in love with writing?
I had just discovered fantasy books for the first time. I had loved fairy tales when I was younger, and then I kind of stopped reading a little bit around 7th grade. I was too cool for it. I had this amazing teacher in 7th grade who called my parents in for a conference, and I was like, look, Sarah's not the worst student in our class. She's not the best, but she's not reading anymore, and she should be reading. And if she doesn't like the books that we're reading in class, just take her to the bookstore, let her wander around, let her pick something out. Don't judge, don't say anything, just buy the books for her. And so my parents did. They brought me to the bookstore, and I picked out three fantasy novels. I walked out of the store with those and devoured them, and it just woke something up in my brain. And I not only loved reading them, I realized I wanted to write those stories. So I just kind of began writing very bad attempts at writing fantasy novels, and then it took me until I was about 16 to really get the first solid idea.
Which became one of your best-selling
books. Yes, which
books.
became my Thorn of Glass series.
You started writing this book when you were 16 years old?
Yes.
Which is amazing.
Writing is what brought me joy, and writing in high school was a sanctuary for me. If things weren't going well at school with friends or at home with family, I could turn to writing, and that was my escape and my joy.
More than 30 million books sold. I mean, that in your wildest dreams, could you ever expected that?
No. When I was first getting started as a writer, just trying to get my first book published, I told myself that even if it took me until I was 90 years old, that I just wanted one book published.
Maas's devoted fan base frequently post about the books on TikTok.
And yes, they are all worth it.
Dress up as characters and even get tattoos honoring the books. Those readers eagerly awaiting the release of Maas's newest book, House of Flame and Shadow. So passionate, they're already asking what's next for Crescent City.
So is there more coming from this series?
Yes. I can't tell you when.
We'll have to wait.
Yes. You will have to wait a bit, but it's on the airport taxiing line, it's a little down. But I kind of know the vague ideas of what I want to happen. I haven't even told my editor this. Surprise!
Do you know what your runway is? Do you know what's coming next?
Yeah, I plan years down the line.
So how many books do you know?
I know the next 4 books that I want to write, and so they're kind of in this taxiing position.
Do you have something written down anywhere or no?
I have little notes scribbled in notebooks, but it's mostly all just kept in my head. I have a terrible memory, but my books, I just have this encyclopedia in my head where I just keep track of it. And maybe it's because the worlds and characters feel so real to me. For the upcoming books, I kind of know, the next one I'm supposed to be writing right now. That one I know much more about.
Is that part of the series?
So that's going to be the next Court of Thorns and Roses book. I'm very, very excited about that one.
Maas's books all take place in magical worlds, feature epic battles, and have strong women at their center.
The women in your books are fierce. I want to say badass. I don't know if I can, but they're badasses.
Yeah. I've always been drawn to writing women that can't be placed in any definable category.
Yeah.
They can be very feminine, but then also go beat the what out of the bad guy and save the world, and then look good doing it.
Well, and there's some steam. There's some very romantic parts of these.
I can't look most of my family in the eye now. My first on-the-page sex scene was in my Court of Thorns and Roses, the first novel in that series, and I needed a glass of wine just to take the edge off. Felt like everyone was staring over my shoulder, watching as I wrote these dirty words. And then also thinking oh my God, my grandmother is going to read this.
Did she give you any feedback?
When the second book in my ACOTAR series came out, A Court of Mist and Fury, that one really stepped up the steam. And so I called her. I was like, Grandma, I love you and I appreciate that you read everything that I I've ever put down on paper, but maybe skip this one. And she's like, well, why, Sarah? I'm like, well, Grandma, there's a lot of like really steamy, sexy material. She just goes, well, that sounds right up my alley.
Oh, I love her.
I was like, Grandma, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know who I am. One of the most mortifying moments of my career was my mother-in-law pulled me aside. She goes, were all those steamy scenes inspired by you and Josh? I wanted to just walk into traffic. I was like, no, Linda, like, we're not.
I'm blushing just imagining that.
Maas's own love story with her husband Josh began nearly 20 years ago. The two met on Maas's first day at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York.
He saw me get out of the car with my parents, pulling up to our dorm, the car full of my stuff. He was the RA in our dorm building. I did not see him until we had our floor meeting that night, and he walked in, and I grabbed my poor roommate's leg and just clawed up her thigh. I was like, he's so cute. I was like, that's the one. I've been with him for over half of my life now. He was my first boyfriend, my first like anything. But I think I can write about true love because I get to live that every day and have someone that supports me and cheers for me and is just rooting for me and isn't threatened in any way by my success, how I'm sitting here today, because my husband encouraged me, and because when I need to write and focus on things, he says, okay, I'll pick up the slack with the kids. Like, I'll handle bedtime tonight so you can focus on this and you don't feel guilty about that.
You're a prolific writer, and you were publishing 2 long novels a year.
Yeah.
And then you've had your first baby, and now you're still publishing 1 giant, a year. Yes. But I mean, how are you doing that?
I'm figuring it out as I go. It changes not just every month, but every week. Writing is my job, but being a mom is like my full-time job, and that's become the most important thing in my life, is making sure that my children, are not only happy and cared for, but that I'm also present for them. It's hard. Like, it is really, it's hard. It is hard to carve out that time for myself. Mm-hmm. Before I had kids, I was writing 2 books a year, but I also had no social life. Like, I was basically Gollum in my little writing cave, just writing all day. But now I get to see the sunlight thanks to my children needing to like go out to school. So the writing pace has slowed down a little bit. A book a year, a book every year and a half. It's a tough thing to, have a job. Mm-hmm. And to need to show up and focus on that job, but then to also be able to focus on your children and make sure they feel loved and safe and important.
You write fantasy, you write romance, but all of what these women go through is really grounded in things that you've experienced and friends of yours have experienced.
Yeah. I mean, when you watch any kind of fantasy thing, like Lord of the Rings, for example, like when you go through an orc massacre, you're going to have some trauma, right? I would be traumatized if I survived the Battle of Helm's Deep. I would never sleep again. I would never be in an enclosed small space again. It felt like a natural thing for my characters to face emotional consequences. The fate of the world sometimes is on their shoulders. That's going to leave a mark on them.
By writing about the struggles she faces, and many other women face too, Maas hopes she gives her readers a sense of hope for tomorrow.
That's what books did for me. So if my books can offer any kind of comfort and joy, I've done my job well.